Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome to another episode of Eitai Teaches Piano. Last week, we went over Bach's Minuet in G, or I guess Petzold's Minuet in G, as a really good starter piece to kind of get some more fundamentals and moving out from our method books. Today, we'll be looking at another one called Melodie from Schumann's album for the Young, which is Opus 48, and this is the first piece in that album. So I think Melodie is another piece that is really good for beginners and late beginners starting to move out of their method books and trying to look for individual pieces. This piece is really good in terms of it has very simple phrases that we can follow, and the technique is really not too difficult, but it has really good it's really nice for the left hand and the right hand to kind of gain their coordination. So first, let's start today with me playing it, and then we'll kind of go over each of the different sections. And there you have it. So with this piece, the form of this piece is rather simple. So we start over here with an A section. We get, and this of course repeats over here. Then we get to the B section. Then we get to another A type section. We're going to call this A prime because the ending of this A section changes. Sorry, just adjusting my mic. And then we get back to a little bit of a B section. And then we go back to the A prime section. So very simple. So I would say is as long as you address maybe the first 2 or 3 lines, you can basically do the entire piece. So let's do just that, and we'll address this first couple lines here. So starting with this A section on the, we'll talk about the first 4 notes, or first 4 measures, I'm sorry. And so starting over here, I'm going to assume that a lot of you have kind of learned this piece, or at least have ran through this piece. And you can see over here right in the beginning of the first 2 measures, we're just kind of like a nice A position. Our A minor position with C natural, and then the only place we would have to move is our thumb on the right hand going down to the G right there at the end of measure 2. And then after this, we can kind of take a little bit of a leap up into measure 3, moving into our G. And then this is just kind of stepping down. We have a little skip here to C, B, and then we have the crossover 2, 3, and then 1. So in this first line, there's not too much to talk about in terms of technique for the right hand. I think the only thing that would be worth addressing is this very last section over here with this 1 and crossover. So with our thumb landing on this B over here, we need to make sure our wrist goes over to help our fingers to reach over to the F sharp and A. And then our thumb letting go to land back on the G. Right, so here, I'll switch to the other camera. So here, over here, right, rather than just reaching over with your 2 fingers and having your arm and wrist be stable, it really helps to move your wrist, move your arm. You can even lean a little bit over to help your hands, your 2 fingers, reach this F sharp and A, getting you back to the G. So there we have it for the right hand. When we get to the left hand on these first 4 measures, one thing to notice is that we are in treble clef. And we have a lot of repeated notes, right? And so if we look over here, one of the repeated notes that we see in the left hand is all these G's, right? We have a G over here, G over here, G over here, G over here. G's, 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 right? So we have G's all over on the left hand. So that's one thing to know as kind of an anchor note that we can kind of rely on to kind of reset and have our left hand memorize like a certain position. So here, in the first 3 measures, all the way to the end, we're just going to be in a nice C position. So if we've done your scales, if you've done your 5 finger positions, this should be something that's not very new, right? So if we have the first couple of measures, right, just moving, just playing all these notes in C position. I'm going through it a little bit fast because I'm going to assume that you've read part of this piece already on your own, and that here we're just working on touching things up. So one thing to make it read a little bit faster, right, is that talking about our anchor notes, right? So we know that our G is our anchor note here in this first measure, right? We have 3 G's. So instead of focusing all on each individual note here, what I like to do for my students is focusing on the note that changes, right? So first we focus on the the C on the downbeat, the F on the second beat, the E on the third beat, and then the C, and then I guess here we go back to E instead of G. Right, so and in the beginning we're gonna ignore some of these G's for now, right, and focus on what note is changing. So C, F, E, C, E, and then here, once you're comfortable with that, we would just bring in our anchor notes, which is the G. And so you already practiced the C, F, and E, and all you have to do is put your thumb in between it, right? We would go C in between, and then the F that we practiced, the G, the E that we practiced, you just throw in the G here, and then this last C and E that we got. Yo, what's up? Yeah, Improv. Thank you so much for the raid. Thanks for bringing your people. We are doing a teaching lesson right here, teaching some piano. So if you guys are interested in learning about piano, feel free to stick around. Thank you so much for the raid. Great. So so that's using the G's as an anchor note. Why this is also important is because as we put this together with the right hand, these notes, the moving notes, are the ones that's going to be played along with your right hand. So if we go along more with the left hand, over here we don't have as many anchor notes on the second measure, but a lot of these are just steps, something that you're very used to if you've gone through your method books or if you've gone through Bartok's Mikrokosmos that we did earlier in the course. But over here in the third measure is where we have a lovely example of where we can use these anchor notes as a way to guide our left hand. Right? So like I said, G is our anchor note, so we're going to ignore the G's for now. So the notes that we're going to be paying attention to is the E, the D, the C, the E, and the D, and then the C over here. Yeah, thanks so much, Improv. Hope you had a great stream. So here with these anchor notes, right, so we're going to focus on the notes that are moving. So here we focus on the E, the D, the C, the E with our second finger as we get prepared to move down. Then we have our third finger on D, and then third finger back on C. Okay, so I would have you practice that again. E, D, C, second finger on E, third finger on D, third finger on C. So once you get used to those notes, right, all we have to do now is kind of think about adding in our anchor note, thinking about our G's that we just left out. Now, in between each of these notes that we practice, we just throw our thumb into the mix. So E, then G, then D that we practice, then C that we practice. We already practiced our second finger moving to E, then going back up to G, our third finger D, third finger down to C, and then we finish this last here for 1 G. Right, so using these anchor notes, very, very important, because now that we take a look at the whole first line, hands together, and we play with both hands, I would have you practice, or have my students practice, just the down, or just the big beats. Right, so on this first measure, I would play the C, then the D with the F on the left hand, and then the C and E, and then the C and B, and then measure 2 is a little bit different. So just talking about measure 1 first, just playing the big beats. And then once you get comfortable with that, moving both of your hands going that way, right, all your right hand has to do is think about going down in steps. Your left hand, you can focus on all the skips and steps that we have to take. And then you just add the G, the anchor note that we had earlier. So here you go again, add the G, then step down. Add the G, step down. Add the G, and then you have the last one, and then here we have the E at the end of the measure. So that should make it a lot easier to tackle it in that way. You just throw in the G once you're ready. because that's the note that we don't really have to think about. You kind of just throw it on there with your thumb. Getting on to measure 2, this one can be a kind of tricky for people, where we have the F and A, right? And so we have something called contrary motion, where your right hand and left hand are going opposite directions, right? My left hand in measure 2 is skipping down, my right hand is skipping up, right? So we're going in opposite directions. So I would just recommend taking this nice and slow over here, right? And if you've been working through your method book and your bar talk musical cosmos, this should be something that is nothing that new, just maybe takes a little bit more practice. Then when we get to measure 3 over here, we use that same idea of which notes are connected, which are the moving notes. Moving your finger. And then, once you get used to that, you just throw in the G's in the middle. Throw in the G, throw in the G, making sure we're following the fingering, throw in the G. And there you go. Right, and so that's kind of the technique that falls into this first line. Nothing too simple or nothing too difficult, right? I think we just have to take it slow and make sure that we focus on the moving notes and don't get too absorbed in all these notes that here in the left hand. It looks very intimidating with all these notes, but it could be very simple if we just recognize that these are all G's that are just repeating, and you just have to play with your thumb. So I know we spent a lot of time talking about just that section, but like we said earlier, this form of the piece is an A, B, A, B, A form. So this A section kind of comes up a lot of times, as you can see in measures 1 and 2. It's the same, very, very similar in measures 9 and 10, and at the end at 17 and 18. So never feel bad about working super in detail in one certain section, because in the future, it's always going to come back, or in a lot of pieces, this comes back. Yeah, great. So that's in terms of the technique of the first section, of the first A section. And so now let's talk a little bit about the phrasing. Why Schumann's melody is so nice is because it's a very simple melody, right? And so this is a great way to practice our 2-bar phrasing, right? So if you remember from last episode, our musical phrase is what we refer to as like a musical sentence, right? Like, or one solid idea. Right, so the first 2 measures, if I play it again with the right hand, right, this is the kind of like our first sentence, our first musical sentence, our first 2-bar musical phrase. Right, and so that's kind of like a period, and then we have the next part. And you can maybe see that as like maybe like a question and answer, or just another musical phrase. Right, and so what do we do with this? Well, in music, on our phrases, we always kind of want to go somewhere, and we always want our music to go somewhere, right? And so here, starting on this E, usually what I like to do a little bit is to add like a mini crescendo to make sure that we're kind of making our music move, right? So instead of just going very straight, all the same, right? It feels very robotic. If I just gave you a MIDI file, the MIDI file would be able to do that, right? But we want some direction to make it a little bit more interesting, right? So if we grow a little bit in this phrase, bom, 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 it makes it a little bit more natural, as if how like a singer would say it, right? Or how we say our sentences. And just like we talked about in Bach in the last one, all of our musical phrases should end on a little bit on the quieter note at the end. Right, so it's almost like if I ended my sentence and I would shout at the end of each of my sentences, right? It's like that's not really how we talk. It just kind of sounds weird or doesn't sound natural, right? So here, always at the end, you want to kind of taper off a little bit at the end of your musical sentences to give it a nice round off, or to give it a nice period. So if we add both, so here I'll do it one more time with the right hand. So making sure we start a little bit softer, and then we're gonna grow. Right, and making sure at this G that we get a little bit softer. And this is a great 2-bar phrase, very nice and simple. And your left hand is just a nice accompanying. Why I like to pair this up with minuet and G for some for like beginners, right? Is that minuet and G, the left hand is very chords, right? There's a lot of chords and a lot of blocked playing. And in here in Melody, in the Schumann piece, there's a lot of movement in the left hand that kind of adds to the character of this piece. and also works on a different technique for beginners, right? So in this piece, I would say that the left hand can kind of follow the shape of the right hand to help give it more of its growth. So let's follow this exact same shape with the right hand and the left hand, crescendoing a little bit into measure 2 and backing away at the end before we get to measure 3. So this is measure 1 and 2. Okay, I'll do that one more time. So you've heard a little bit of that growth and a little bit of a taper. Oh, I'm sorry. And then over here, we have a little decrescendo mark here. So that suggests that this part is going to get softer over time, right? And so here we have a big leap from the right hand, right? We have the leap from the lower G up to the upper octave. And if you imagine a singer to sing that, or if they go from one octave to the higher octave, the dynamic would usually increase by a lot, right? And so here, after we die down in measure 2, and then right? So here we can give it a little bit more, not shouting, but we can give it a little bit more volume, a little bit more strength to it as we get very high up in the right hand, and then we can kind of die down a little bit and then decrescendo, which follows our similar idea that we had here, where we taper off at the end of the measure, or at the end of the phrase, right? So here we skipping up to the G, and then staying loud, and then decrescendoing to end the phrase. And here, great, so it's another 2-bar phrase, nice musical sentence there. And then if we connect them all together, we have one large 4-bar phrase, which is very typical in music, which is what we talked about in Bach a lot, right? So let's do all of it together, or let's do the last two measures 3 and 4 with the left hand first, or left hand and right hand. So starting a little bit louder, and then soft. There you go. Okay, and then maybe I'm slowing down a little bit too much. Right, so the hard part is that we want to get softer and not slow down at the same time, at least in this piece. Okay, so that's the idea. That's kind of the musical ideas with both of these. So let's take the whole first 4 measures, the whole 4-bar phrase. So starting a little bit softer to grow. Getting a little bit softer, loud here, and then getting softer. Let's repeat it. There we go. Okay, and so that's your first phrase. That's our A section. Okay, and then so when we get to here in the A prime section, we'll talk a little bit about that as well. One last thing to notice about the first line is that we have a little rest here, right? So make sure that your right hand lets go, right? That our right hand lets go, or lets go of the piece, right? So of the note, so that our left hand G can be heard over here. Okay, great. Now let's talk about the B section. This is line 2, starting at measure 5. If you have any questions, of course, on the A section or anything in this piece, feel free to leave it in the comments. Let me know in the Discord. Always happy to answer your guys' questions. Okay, so we're going to go to line 2 over here, measure 5. And here we have a similar idea. I won't talk too much about the technique in the left hand. The left hand technique is very similar. And in this line, I think it's even easier that although you have more moving notes on the left hand, these are the ones that we can focus on, right? And then we have that same idea of the anchor note with the G's, right? All throughout the second line, measures 5 through 8, we have G's kind of going right through the measure. So in the beginning, remove the G's, practice without the G's. Once you get comfortable with all those notes, add the G's back in with your thumb, and I think that makes it a lot simpler. Okay, so use that G anchor note. Here with the right hand, I think it's very simple as well, right? We just have steps starting on our third finger on measure 5, and then rest, and then you just have steps here. Okay, one thing I'd like to talk about is this measure 8 with the right hand. So over here in measure 8, right, this is pretty simple. The last thing to talk about is this one, this A and F combo. So in many editions and in the proper editions, is you'll see that there's a little stem up here for the F, and it's a dotted quarter note, and you'll see a stem down on the rest of these 8 notes. What that means is that you're going to have to hold the F, because it's a dotted half note, while you play the C and the B And then only on this very last D can you let go of this F, because you see the stem attached to the D, the upper stem and the lower stem, right? So that's when your F lets go, right? So 1, then let go of the F right at the end there. So one more time, hold the F, 2, 1, and then you get to measure 9, right? So starting measure maybe from over here from measure 7. 1, 3, 2, 5. Hold your fourth finger, and then let go on the D, and then you get to measure 9. Okay, so that's one technique to think about. And here, our phrasing is very, very similar to the first line, right? So here we have two ideas, right? We have this idea, and then repeats the same steps but on a little bit higher. So what I like to think about is that this is maybe the first idea. Maybe you can think mezzo piano or piano, whatever you're feeling. And then the second idea that it repeats, we're gonna get it a little bit louder, maybe mezzo forte. And then we have more steps of the similar theme of the B section, and maybe we can get this to forte, so we can kind of build up, right? It's almost like we're walking like terrace dynamics, right? So starting lower here, and then we're gonna get a little bit louder because it's the same idea, and then we get louder again here, and then at the end of the phrase we can get softer, and then we repeat measure number 9. Right, so it's almost like maybe if your mom or something has yelled at you when you're younger, right? Like they say it once, right? They mean it. They say it again, they mean it even more, right? Maybe they almost start to yell, and then the third time they really like yell at you or whatever, right? So that's a similar idea here that I think about in this B section, is that we say it the first time, rest. Oh, we really mean it. And then here we're really meaning it on the third time, and then we can get softer as we do with all of our musical phrases. Okay, and so if we add this with the left hand, here again I would say just the left hand to kind of follow the texture of the right hand, or the dynamics of the right hand. And here the left hand has 8 notes, so the left hand can do a lot of work to actually help with these crescendos. Because there are more notes to play on the left hand, that gives us more notes and more time to get a little bit louder. So here, starting measure 5, starting mezzo piano, rest, now getting a little bit louder, helping with the left hands, shouting here, and then getting softer, and then we get back to measure 9. Right, and so measure 9 is back to the A section. Our A section over here in the first line started at piano. As we kind of decrescendo through this end of the B section, we can kind of lead back to this piano of measure 9 and do it all over again. Right, so let's put this all together. So let's do both ideas. Right, let's start over here at measure 1. Okay, and then I'll skip the repeat this time, so I'll skip this repeat, and then we'll kind of get into measure 5 with the B section, and then we can talk about this last A prime section. Okay, ready? Let's do it. Growing a little bit here. Leap up. No repeat this time. Now mezzo piano. Rest. We're getting a little bit louder because it's the second statement. Now we have here, and then we get softer at the end of the phrase. Okay, and then I played a little bit into measure 9 and 10 there. Great, so that's kind of the ideas that we talked about, right? There are always other ways to do it, so feel free to maybe mention in the Discord or whatever, like maybe your own thoughts, right? Maybe you have opposite ideas, or maybe getting softer or getting louder at different points to me. This is the way I learned it, and this is kind of the way that I teach a lot of my students. One last thing to talk about overall, right, is that all these lines, right, kind of indicate our phrases, but it also indicates our legato, right? We want to make sure that in this piece we don't have, right, it kind of chops up the melody. So we want to make sure that throughout the whole piece that all of our notes are legato and all connected, which is why this is another fantastic piece, instructional piece that can help us work on our technique. Very simple notes, very simple melody, but there's a lot to learn from it. Learn us keeping our fingers curved, a really good technique, making sure everything is nice and legato. Great. Okay, so let's talk about the last one at 8 prime. So measure 9 and 10 is exactly the same as the first two measures. The only thing different would be this extra note over here. I think other than that, it's pretty simple. Good. So this addition suggests 5 and 3. We talked a little bit about fingerings before, right? Fingerings are kind of up to you as long as it sounds smooth and works for your hand. For me, coming in from the measure 8 section, I actually use 2 and 4, but I would leave that up to you to kind of to figure out. Yeah, right. So I think I use 2 and 4, and then I walk down 3. If you want to follow mine, 3, 2, 1, and then I do a little crossover over here on 2. And then it'll feel like exactly like the beginning. Maybe you prefer the 5-3 way, and then maybe this way is a little bit simpler. But yeah, that's completely up to you. Okay. The thing that's different here is that we get to the right hand where we jumping up to the A instead of having this, this G over here in measure 3. So in measure 11, we go to this A, and then here we have 2 notes together, and then 2 notes together, and then nice in the little B position here to end it. Okay, so one thing that I would like to notice here, right, is that we talked about the idea of being very legato, right? And so if you watch my hand closely, if I follow this fingering, 5, 4, then 1, 3, okay? And then in order to get to this C and E, I'm out of fingers, right? So if I let go, okay, we're gonna kind of let go of this F, right? And then it's not gonna sound legato. So what this 3-5 is suggesting is that we switch our finger after we play, right? This is a good technique to kind of practice in this simple piece that you might run into in the future. So what this means is that we play this B and F with our 1 and 3. After we play the F, we're gonna hold the F with our third finger. Then we're gonna move your pinky over here to pick up the F without letting the note pick up. So 3, pinky, and then the F is still playing. 3, pinky, the F is still playing. I didn't replay it. Right? And so what this does is that it makes it completely legato. It's almost as if we just did this. Right? The idea is that we don't want the listener, if they couldn't see my hands, right? We would want them to think that this was completely legato. Right? And so good. So after you hit this 3 to 5, you're gonna use 2 and 4, nice here in this C and E, and then you're right in position for measure 12 to kind of take you all the way to the end. D, F, B, D, C. And so that's one technique thing to talk about here, right? So after we finish measure 9, so measure 9, da, da, da. Now we go to A with our pinky, 4, 1, 3, 5 switch, 2, 4, and then we're all set to finish the rest of the phrase. Okay, so that's one technique to think about. Then over here with the left hand, let's start right here, measure 10. Now here you would have to reach, right? So over here, I'll switch cameras one more time. So here we have an F to C, right? If you have a smaller hand, kind of like me, right, that thumb might barely reach, right? So you can always just give your body a little bit help, right? Moving your arm, moving your wrist, moving your body, right, to kind of center your arm to help you reach that C, right? If I were to just stand still right here, my thumb barely reaches it, right? So and it also hurts to stretch this far, right? So I want to use my arm, use my body a little bit to lean, to give me that extra reach that I need. I can hit the E, C, and then here we go back to C position, and then I think from here it's very straightforward. Okay, so that's one thing to think about going to the C, right? So using our body, using our whole arm, right? Playing the piano is not just our fingers, but our whole body activity, right? So starting over here, right, reaching over. So and our right hand is also up higher in the keyboard, so it really doesn't hurt to kind of lean over a little bit higher. 1, 3, 5 switch, 2, 4, we can go back, lean back to the center, and then that's the end of our measure 12. right? So that's another good reason why we want to make sure we have good posture, right? Our back straight, our feet are on the ground, so that we can kind of have that mobility. We want our butts to be firmly on the chair, so that we have that mobility to move, right? Because we're not just gonna stand still and play all throughout the piano, right? We're gonna move. We're gonna be moving side to side, and so even in a piece like this, right? You can even practice with a piece like this, moving, right? Going back to here, we're gonna recenter ourselves, right? If I play this section and I'm still leaned over, I can do it, right? But it's a little bit uncomfortable, right? So you want to make sure that you re-center yourself after you lean up, right? So over here, you want to make sure you re-center so that you can play the rest of the piece a little bit more comfortably. Okay, and then there we have it, right? So that's most of the piece. So this piece is a little bit shorter in terms of everything here, because if we go back, if we scroll out, right, we have the A section, this A prime that we just went over, repeats at measure 17 exactly how it is in measure 9, right? So the line 3 and line 5 of this piece is exactly the same. Lines 2 and lines 4 is exactly the same. So the last thing I would do is talk a little bit about practicing it, right, and how you would break it down. And so sometimes I would say it's not the most efficient to go over the whole piece right away, right? It's where you can just take it in different sections. So maybe one day I would practice the A section, getting that really nicely, right? Focusing on purely on the A section in the beginning will really help your improvement here in the measure 9 and measure 17, even if this is a little bit different. And then maybe another day you can tackle the B section, right? There are different ways to do it, and so don't feel like if you're spending a lot of time on one section that it's a waste, right? Because if you work on it in the beginning, you're also working on it on the middle and as well in the end, especially with this piece. I think other than that, I think that's it. We addressed some technique in the fingerings of the left hand and the right hand, some problems that we might run into, and we also talked about the musical phrasing. I also really love this piece. Like I said earlier, it's a great one to start with musical phrasing, having students, younger students or even older students, understand the concepts of 2-bar phrasing and 4-bar phrasing, kind of how to shape our melodies, because it is a lot simpler and we don't have to worry about all our hands going all over the place. So thank you guys very much. I really do appreciate you guys joining me here on Twitch or on YouTube, and if you guys enjoyed, please remember to subscribe and like this video. If you guys have any pieces you would like me to go over, feel free to leave it in the comments. Feel free to join our Discord. We started a new Discord that's kind of centered around piano learning, and we would love to have you there. I always answer everybody's questions there, and we love to see your progress, your recordings, your performances, etc. And let me know what topics you guys would like me to cover. I'm gonna keep going over some pieces, and maybe eventually we'll get into videos where we talk about practice routines, practice techniques, and all that kind of stuff. So thank you guys so much, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care.